Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation of the study, First Year Effects of Early Indicator and Intervention Systems in Oregon. If you can please introduce yourself in the chat, that'd be great. Your name and organization and other relevant information would be nice to see who's on the call today. So my name is Michelle Hodera, and I'm a researcher at Education Northwest. Education Northwest is a nonprofit, education nonprofit here in Oregon, and we hold the contract for REL Northwest. REL Northwest is one of 10 regional educational laboratories across the United States that serve their respective geographic region. So you can see the REL Northwest region in the map on the slide, the 5-state region, which includes Oregon. The goal of the REL program is to help states and districts use data to address important policy issues and improve educational practices and student outcomes. We provide services to local stakeholders through research partnerships. So with that, I'm going to introduce the authors of the study who will be presenting. I'll ask that everybody stay on mute while you're listening to the presentation. We are recording right now. We'll record the presentation, and then we'll have a discussion, and we'll stop recording so that we can all be free to discuss the study. But the recording will be available online at the conclusion of the presentation. So our presenters today are the authors of the report. We have Susan Stepanek and Mickey Shih from MDRC here with us. MDRC is another research organization and a subcontractor on the REL Northwest contract. Susan is a senior associate at MDRC where she leads rigorous evaluations. Mickey is a research analyst at MDRC where she analyzes data and supports multiple research and evaluation projects. So with that, I'll turn it over to our authors to hear about the study today.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, I'm Susan, and during this presentation, Mickey and I will be covering the following topics: why the study was conducted, the research questions, the data sources and the sample, the methods used, the findings, and finally, some key implications coming out of the findings. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and we will respond either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. We'll also have time at the end of the presentation for more questions and for an open discussion and for folks to share an action that you might want to take in your community to use these findings. So let's start by talking about why this study was conducted. In 2018, 15% of US public school students and 21% of Oregon public school students did not graduate within 4 years of starting high school. On a positive note, Oregon graduation rates have seen steady improvement over the last 6 years, and the graduation rate in 2020 was almost 83%. But still, this is a serious problem for the students that do not graduate because educational attainment is important to students' future employment and earnings, as well as their social and personal well-being and our societal well-being. On average, young adults that haven't completed high school earn $26,000 per year, not a living wage in our current economy. And these students are more likely to live in poverty, suffer from poor health outcomes, become incarcerated, or depend on social services. In November 2016, Oregon voters approved ballot measure 98 to provide funding to school districts for high school dropout prevention and college and career readiness initiatives. The measure provided $170 million in funding for the High School Success Initiative from 2017 through 2019. Many districts use the funding to adopt an early indicator and intervention system, or EIIS, to identify students at risk of not graduating, assign them to individualized services, and monitor their response. EIISs use data to identify students that may be at risk of not graduating. Researchers have identified key indicators of high school dropout that can be used in an EIS to monitor students' risk factors. Schools have little influence over some factors, such as family and student characteristics, or early adult responsibilities, but they have greater influence over others, including school engagement, behavior, and course performance. Research has identified 3 main school-related indicators that are associated with dropping out or not graduating high school and are often used in EISs. These include chronic absenteeism, course performance, and disciplinary infractions. Attendance and course performance data in particular appear to be strong predictors of dropout and high school graduation, while the evidence for disciplinary infractions is a bit more mixed. EISs use data dashboards to identify students who are not meeting district-defined thresholds on one or more of these key indicators associated with high school graduation. A response team made up of teachers, administrators, and counselors from the school and district meets at designated intervals throughout the school year. The response team determines the best available services for each student identified as at risk of not graduating, depending on that student's specific needs. For example, after-school math tutoring could benefit students who are flagged for receiving a D in a math class, whereas a first period check-in could support a chronically absent student. School districts across the country have adopted EISs because they can enable schools to use real-time data to identify students most in need of support and offer an organized system to manage a school's diverse individualized services. The theory of change for EIS suggests that when all EIS components are implemented at a school, it is hypothesized that overall rates of chronic absenteeism and disciplinary infractions will decrease and course performance will improve. If students are more likely to attend school, engage in classes, and progress in their coursework, they are expected to strengthen their academic skills and build proficiency in core subjects, and to increase their persistence in school and progression to the next grade. Stronger academic performance and increased progression could ultimately lead to improved high school graduation rates and career readiness. While that is the theory of change, thus far, few rigorous studies of EISs, also called early warning systems or early warning indicator and monitoring systems, have been conducted. The What Works Clearinghouse practice guide called Preventing Dropout in Secondary Schools recommends early warning systems, but notes the evidence is minimal. A study conducted by the REL Midwest found EISs reduced chronic absenteeism and course failure in the first year, but did not affect grade point average, suspensions, or credits in that year. Another study of a school reform model called Diplomas Now that included an EIS did not find impacts of the model on individual indicators, but found impacts on a composite measure of attendance, behavior, and course performance combined. While not experimental, this study in Oregon offers some additional insight into the early effects of EIS. So what were we trying to learn in this study? This study looks at the effects of EIS in 2018-19, the first year of EIS rollout after the High School Success Initiative started. While districts received funding from the Success Initiative in 2017-18, it was not until 2018-19 that districts needed to create a high school success plan, and many districts included EISs in those plans. We explore the effects of EISs on chronic absenteeism and disciplinary infractions across all high school students in all grades combined and by grade level. We also explore the effects of EISs on course progression for grade 9 students and academic performance for grade 11 students. Finally, we look at the effects for subgroups of students who would likely have been identified by an EIS as at risk of not graduating in the year prior to the study. So let's take a little closer look at these outcome measures. The measure of chronic absenteeism is the percentage of students who were absent for more than 10% of enrolled days. And the measure of severe chronic absenteeism is the percentage of students who were absent for more than 15% of enrolled days. Disciplinary infraction includes the percentage of students who were ever suspended or expelled during the year. The course progression measure we were able to look at is the Oregon Department of Education's indicator for 9th grade on track, which is the percentage of students who obtained at least 25% of the credits required for high school graduation by the end of 9th grade. We could not look at other measures of course performance because we only had data for the Oregon Department of Education and did not have district course data. Finally, academic performance is measured as the percentage of grade 11 students who scored proficient or better on the Smarter Balanced assessments in math and English language arts. Again, we looked at these measures because of the data that was available. Ideally, we would have looked at students' course performance in math and English, as those would be more directly affected by the EIIS. But these data were not available from the state. For our subgroup analysis, we did not have access to actual EIS data, so could not directly explore how well EISs help students who were identified for additional services during the program year. Instead, we looked at the effects of EIS on subgroups of students who did not meet EIS thresholds in the year before EIS adoption. So these are mostly students who have been at risk in the past and not necessarily those who recently dropped off. Subgroups include students who were absent for 15% or more of school days, so severely chronically absent, students who were suspended or expelled one or more times, and students who did not meet the state's 9th grade on-track threshold, meaning they did not acquire at least 25% of the credits required for high school graduation during grade 9. Okay, now I'll pass it on to Mickey, who's going to talk about the data sources, the sample, the methods, and the study findings.
Thanks very much, Susan. I'll start by talking about the data sources that we used in our study. The data sources in our study include the Oregon Department of Education, who provided student and school level administrative records, the US Department of Ed's Common Core of Data database, which includes additional school level administrative data such as Title I status and urbanicity, and the Willamette Education Service District, which included information on districts' participation in the Oregon Data Suite, which is the particular EIIS that we studied. We included 65 districts who implemented EIISs in our study. These districts were included because they met the following criteria. 1, they logged into the Oregon Data Suite at least once. 2, they had at least one high school. And 3, they had available data on all of the outcome measures during the 2018-19 school year and the 5 prior years. In many ways, districts implementing EIIS were similar on average to other districts across Oregon. Their students had similar levels of absenteeism, disciplinary infractions, academic achievement, and course progression, which, as Susan mentioned, were the outcomes we looked at in our study. Still, there were a few things that set these districts apart from the average Oregon district. They had higher proportions of students from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds than the average district. They also had larger school enrollments and higher student to teacher ratios. In addition to the 65 EIIS districts, we also included 29 non-EIIS districts in our study to use as a comparison. These 29 districts were selected because they were similar to EIIS districts in their levels and trends of study outcomes, such as chronic absenteeism or disciplinary infractions, their student composition, and their structural characteristics. Districts in the study had, on average, 31% students of color, very few English learners, and approximately 14% students with individualized education plans. A large percentage of the high schools were rural, and the graduation rate was approximately 81%. Next, I'll go over the analytic methods we used in our study. Our study used a comparative interrupted time series design, or a CITS, to evaluate the effects of EIISs in our district, in the program districts. CITS evaluates program effects by examining whether school districts that implemented an intervention, in this case an EIIS, deviated from their baseline trends by a greater amount than a group of similar comparison districts. This methodology was chosen because Oregon's High School Success Initiative caused a substantial influx of funding and other support for EIISs from the Oregon Department of Education during the program year. Because of this, a large number of districts adopted an EIIS at the same time, while other similar districts adopted different initiatives, such as other dropout prevention activities or college and career readiness programs. In addition, school records for multiple school years were available for all of the districts in Oregon. These conditions are well suited for a CITS, as it was possible for the study team to select and match districts based on their characteristics in the 5 years prior to widespread EIIS adoption. This chart illustrates how a comparative interrupted time series design would assess the impact of a program like EIIS. This image is just a hypothetical example with fake data to show how a CITS works, so don't read too much into it. The left of the chart shows that prior to the program start, the program districts, represented in blue, and the non-program districts, represented in orange, have similar levels and trends for a given characteristic. We use those trends to predict what will happen in the next year, and that prediction is shown using dashed lines. After the program is completed, we see what actually happened and how much that deviated from what we expected. In this instance, we see that the blue dot, representing what actually happened, is far away from the blue diamond, which shows our prediction. In comparison, the orange dot and diamonds are not too far away from each other. We estimate the impact of the program in a CITS by calculating how much more the trend deviated in the program districts than it did in the non-program districts. A big part of CITS is selecting a group of comparison districts which are similar to program districts on a range of characteristics. The more similar the comparison districts, the better the CITS. Due to this, we used a wide range of characteristics to identify the most suitable comparison districts for the study. These characteristics include the baseline levels and trends of all of the outcome measures like chronic absenteeism or disciplinary infractions, the district student comparison in the last baseline year, such as average school enrollment and percentages of racial or ethnic minority students, and district structural characteristics, such as high school graduation rates and school locale. EIIS and comparison districts were found to be very similar on student composition and outcome measures in the year before the program. This study has two key limitations. First, the study only looked at outcomes after 1 year of EIIS adoption. It may take more than 1 year for outcomes to be fully realized. For example, some of the medium to long-term outcomes like academic achievement and graduation rates aren't expected to show impacts this early. And school and district staff might need more time to get used to the system in order to fully implement it as intended. Another important limitation is the lack of implementation information. Though we had initially planned to collect more detailed information on how districts were using EIIS, the pandemic led to school closures and shifts to online learning, which made collecting that information impossible, unfortunately. Without this information, we could not assess whether findings represent a test of fully implemented EIISs or whether comparison districts use similar systems. So, what did we find? As a recap, we had 5 distinct research questions, starting with, What were the early effects of EIISs on chronic absenteeism and severe chronic absenteeism? As a reminder, chronic absenteeism refers to being absent 10% or more of the school year. Severe chronic absenteeism means being absent at least 15% of the school year. The effect of EIIS adoption on chronic absenteeism appears to be concentrated in grades 10 and 11. EIIS adoption appears to reduce rates of chronic absenteeism by more than 5 percentage points for students in grades 10 and more than 6 percentage points for students in grade 11. Although the percentage of chronically absent students appears to have declined in grades 9 and 12, these differences are not statistically different from 0 and should be interpreted with caution. EIIS adoption appears to have reduced rates of severe chronic absenteeism by an average of 3.3 percentage points across all grade levels, that is grades 9 through 12. This reduction does not appear to apply equally to all grades. EIIS adoption appears to reduce the percentage of severely chronically absent students by a statistically significant 5.2 percentage points in grade 10 and a statistically significant 5.6 percentage points in grade 11. In contrast, the apparent reductions for grades 9 and 12 are, like in the previous outcome, not statistically different from 0. The second research question was, what were the early effects of EIISs on disciplinary infractions? Disciplinary infractions include suspensions and expulsions. EIIS adoption does not appear to have affected the overall rate of disciplinary infractions for grades 10, 11, and 12, or overall. However, it does seem to have increased the rate of disciplinary infractions for 9th graders, for whom there was a 2.8 percentage point increase, resulting in an infraction rate of 7.7% for the average EIIS district. Our third research question was, what are the early effects of EIISs on course progression in grade 9? For this question, like Susan mentioned, we looked at the percentage of 9th graders earning at least 25% of the credits needed to graduate, as these students are considered to be on track to graduate in 4 years. In the 2018-19 school year, about 82% of grade 9 students in the average EII district met the course progression goal, compared with an estimated 79% of students in the absence of EIIS. Thus, EIIS adoption does not appear to have affected the overall percentage of grade 9 students who are considered on track to graduate in the first program year. Our last confirmatory research question was, what were the early effects of EIISs on academic performance in grade 11? Again, academic performance was measured using the Smarter Balanced English Language Arts and Math tests. EIIS adoption in Oregon does not appear to have affected academic performance in grade 11 for either English Language Arts or for math. It's perhaps noting that students did receive higher scores on the math assessment than we predicted, given the trend in prior years. However, this was true for both the EIIS districts and the comparison districts, which indicates that the change was not caused by EIIS. I also want to note that these results are not surprising. Longer implementation periods are usually required for a program to affect academic outcomes, and this result provides a useful confirmation of that. In addition to the confirmatory research questions mentioned previously, we also asked an exploratory research question. What were the early effects of EIISs on subgroups of students who would have been identified by an EIIS as at risk of not graduating on time in the year prior to the study? The study team analyzed the effects of EIISs on subgroups of students who would likely have been identified through an EIIS during the year before adoption to see whether adoption of an EIIS affected the outcomes of students who were struggling with attendance, behavior, or course performance before the program year. These subgroups included students who were severely chronically absent, had disciplinary infractions, or failed to accumulate enough credits by the end of grade 9 to be considered on track to graduation. Overall, the study team found no evidence indicating that the district-wide adoption of an EIIS benefited any of these student subgroups. Next, I'll pass the slides back to Susan, who will speak about the implications of the study findings.
Thanks, Nikki. We'll finish by discussing 4 implications we identified from the study findings in our report. First, the mixed findings suggest that Oregon might want to do further research to identify the indicators and interventions most beneficial to students. During the first year, EISs appear to have reduced the proportion of students who were chronically absent, making it worth exploring whether using an EIS to target and support students with attendance issues might alleviate the problem of chronic absenteeism. In Oregon, approximately 30% of high school students are chronically absent, and about 17% are severely chronically absent. On the other hand, the study did not find positive effects in EIS districts on other outcome measures and found 1 negative effect on disciplinary infractions in grade 9. The Oregon Department of Education may want to gather more evidence on the effectiveness of EISs on different student outcomes across Oregon to provide guidance to school districts. Districts may want to consider dropping disciplinary infractions from their EISs or changing the interventions they use when students are identified as meeting or exceeding the disciplinary infraction thresholds. Second, additional effort might be needed to ensure that the EIS initiative supports grade 9 students, as the outcomes for grade 9 students were less promising than other grades. And on the screen, it goes through, as a reminder, some of those outcome differences. As students transition into high school, they often experience less support, larger class sizes, and less personal attention from teachers, and they encounter more demanding coursework, higher academic expectations, and stronger social pressures. As a result, they are more likely to disengage during grade 9 than other grades. And disengaging in grade 9 is highly correlated with failing to graduate later. Therefore, it might be particularly important for districts to use EISs to support students who struggle in grade 9. Districts that implement EISs could offer additional training for staff that work with grade 9 students and ensure data from the middle grades are accessed and properly reviewed at the beginning of the year. Third, to fully understand and accurately interpret this study's findings, and to strengthen EIS adoption, the Oregon Department of Education and participating districts might want to assess program implementation and identify challenges that could affect success. They might also want to consider a study that includes a review of the alternative types of activities that have been funded by the High School Success Initiative and that have been implemented by the comparison districts in this study. In 2019, Oregon legislators passed the Student Success Act, which extended funding for the High School Success Initiative for several years. The continuity of that funding might encourage districts to continue or begin implementing EISs. So it could be helpful to develop a better understanding of how the degree of implementation and its context might affect student outcomes. And finally, to understand the effects of a mature EIS program, the Oregon Department of Education and participating districts might want to consider a follow-up study of the longer-term effects of EISs, as it may take longer to see effects on medium and longer-term outcomes. The intervention may take more than 1 year to fully implement, and it may take more than 1 year before the supports offered students lead to observable changes. Ideally, a follow-up study would look at a mature system implemented for at least 4 years so that it could follow participating students from grade 9 through high school graduation to measure whether EISs met their long-term outcomes high school graduation rates. Okay, so now we would like to open it up to discussion to see if folks have any other questions. Please let us know if you have any remaining questions. We'll start there.